Everybody has an opinion about building company culture when things are good. What about when they're not? Today, we'll be talking about managing and building team culture in the valleys. Today on Culture Builder Live. Hey there, I am Chris Wink. I am the CEO and co-founder of Technically. We are a news organization with a community of tech professionals we help companies hire from. Today, we're talking about building company culture, but not in the peaks, but in the valleys. To do that, I am talking with Vlad Rihkter. He's the CEO of Zenput. Company's been running for a decade, so he's seen some peaks, but he has seen some valleys. Vlad, thanks for being here.
Chris, thanks for having us on here. It's a pleasure to come in and talk about some of the most important parts of the company.
Life goal you've reached, Vlad. You're here at Culture Builder Live. It's happening.
I was as a small boy, I was dreaming of this event.
I know that. Years. We're making dreams happen. So, Vlad, Zenput, you guys are a SaaS company that serves food services companies. It's restaurants, convenience stores. So you're in the thick of growing a company. You've done it for 10 years. I imagine there's lots of high points, but any CEO I've ever talked to who isn't a liar acknowledges that there are times that it's not great, and some of the company culture ends up taking a hit. There's a sense of like which ways is going. That's the real journey. So we're calling that the valleys today. So love to talk for a minute first about building company culture in those valley moments. So not like when everything's great, bonuses are out, everyone's feeling it, coverage is all over you, but those tougher moments, are you handling that approach differently? Like maybe if a pandemic has crushed your line of business, does that change how you approach company culture, or what is different in those valley moments?
Yeah, sure. So I think let me start with maybe the highest level view that I believe, and I always preach to the rest of the company. I think company culture is the only defensible part of a company over time. If you think today at Apple, Google, Facebook, Amazon, they're all vastly successful technology companies, but their cultures drive what they can and cannot do, right? And how their employees work together, what kind of products they can put together, so on and so forth, right? Relatively early on, when we got going, we spent the first kind of couple of years as a business trying to figure out, our way. And I realized that while we were trying to figure out what direction we were headed in, who we wanted to be, what we wanted to do, people would potentially leave if they didn't actually understand why we were doing some of the things that we were doing. And we decided relatively early on that it was important to kind of connect with the individuals and give them a really strong sense of what the company culture would be like. If we did that at the beginning, and if we did that as things were going rough, maybe potentially 3, 4, 5 years down the line, we'd find a way to make sure that people kind of banded together and pushed through it. And I think for the most part, we've seen a relatively good success story of it. I'm happy to give you maybe a little bit of context as to what is it that we did from the early days that allowed us to kind of go through both really successful peaks and some of the valleys on that front.
Yeah, I mean, I think that might be a way to get at. I'm most interested in the valley moments because as a journalist who covers tech companies, I always hear about the peaks. The valleys are the ones that that's when people stop returning our emails. So I want to hear about that, but maybe a different way for me to approach it is, if as a seasoned CEO, as a founder, as an HR pro or another technology professional, if you've been around this, that if you're joining a team in a company, it might not always be the best. So I'm curious how you've approached building the teams that are ready for that. And maybe that's a way to get me into your point there of like, how are you building the team that are ready for the valleys?
Yeah, of course. So I'll probably start with the leadership team that we built over the years. And as I've had to hire leaders that come in, you do a lot of interviews, right? And you want to find individuals that sort of work phenomenally well with not just yourself, but others in the company. So there have been 3 things that I've generally looked for. And this is sort of senior director, VP, C-level individuals come in. One is work ethic, right? You want to see somebody that knows how to work, that doesn't get scared by putting in the hours themselves. 2, this is probably the most important one, is we always look for people that can flex no matter if they're talking to an individual down at the IC level, right? If you're running marketing, you can talk to one of your demand gen managers, you can talk to your field marketing manager and help them out with whatever you need to. But can also then turn around and report back up to a board, a set of investors, go on stage and talk about the business, right? And so that allows you to get a connection with individuals where people in the company see these leaders and say, listen, this is great. This person will get in the trenches with me. And that's what I'm looking for as an individual. Like, I appreciate that, as opposed to this person, when things get tough, tosses it over to me. And I think the third part that we're very kind of pragmatic about is we look for people that aren't necessarily into brand building for themselves. We've always said to everyone that if the company does really well, being here at this place and this time, in the future, when you look at a resume, people look at it and go, oh, wow, you were at Zenput at that time period. I've heard really great things about that company, that culture. That'll speak wonders for you on additional opportunities along the way. And if you're bringing the right people, some of that may be together and some of that may be a bit separate, right? And so those are the three main things, right? We're looking for work ethic. We're looking for people that can flex from, down to the individual contributor all the way to the board level, and folks that are really interested on the company building part of it. And I would tell you that within that, there are three things that we end up looking for that I think have really dragged us through some of these valleys that are maybe a little bit more unique to our culture, at least the way that we put it together. And those three things are around transparency, authenticity, and enjoying the journey, right? And so transparency for us means, employees being able to ask a question at any time of any person in the company. We share out every board meeting deck and memos that afterwards with the entire company. We look for people that are authentic, right? We encourage people to be their true selves and make sure that they're sharing information about themselves. We even have something as far as called an operating manual, where we ask about 8 or 9 questions within that operating manual about the individual when they start on day one. What do you like to work with? What do you not like to work with? What do you like? What do you not like? And I think the last part is enjoying the journey. How do we have fun together as a team? And so those two things sort of blend between what we look for at the leadership team level, and then in general, how we sort of differentiate between other companies. Of, we know that if things hit a rough patch in a month, in a quarter, or sometimes even in a year, that people will bind together and care about one another and make sure that they'll still continue to succeed as an organization. And to your point earlier, not just dip out because the numbers didn't come quite where they were supposed to be.
I'm the idea of dipping out seems interesting. Like basically, how do you make sure you have a team that sticks around when the going gets tough? Is another way that you're describing it, which seems important. There's a flywheel that on the news side, I can say quite confidently, we try to take seriously those stories when we hear, or I should say, we pause. As often happens, we'll hear the stories of, there's been a high rate of turnover over at company X. And as a news organization, we take you seriously, saying that sometimes just happens for lots of reasons. That's not something we go jump, but we might pay closer attention to. But you're getting at, if you have a team that's entirely there on comp and comp alone, and something turns, the wind shifts, and for a moment you've lost footing, and a whole bunch of different people leave because they're only there for the comp reasons, it can become very cyclical. Well, then speculation grows out of control, and suddenly it can become self-fulfilling. You're describing that defensible moat, as it were, that if you can stick with me for a little bit, give me a chance to write the weather, I can weather it. I'd love to, for a moment, step away from generalities. Do you have a specific moment, a time, a period that Zenput went through when you were like, man, this is not us at our best? And talk a little bit about what culture felt like.
Yep. So I think there's probably 2 time periods that come to mind. So the first couple of years, we had closed our seed round back in 2014, and we sort of were kind of big eyes open. We've got a little bit of money in the bank. It's now time to hit the ground running. And we hit the ground running, and about 7 months later, we sort of hit a wall. We were selling our product to a lot of different people, a lot of different customers, and a lot of different industries, a lot of different use cases. And although the team was small at the time, 8 or 9 folks, we kind of didn't know. We didn't have an identity. Right. We didn't have an identity to our customer, and we didn't have an identity internally. And at the time, my co-founder and I sort of sat down and said, "Look, we've got to pick a direction here because I don't think we're sort of pulling ourselves apart in a whole lot of different things, right? We want to be something to field service people, something to food service people, something to manufacturing folks, and they're whole different stories." And we sat down and we made a conscious decision to do two things. One was, let's make sure that we target the type of customer and the type of product that we want to build, right? So let's really fine tune who it is that we're selling to. And in turn, let's have some very difficult discussions with the team. And at that point, it was 7, 8, 9, maybe 10 people, and say, look, here's what we're going to do. This is going to mean that we're going to lose some customers in the course of the next 12 months. But if we do this right, we should probably get a lot more coming out of it on the other side. And we had a bit of a time period there from the end of 2014 to the end of 2015 when we were sort of changing the direction the business was going, and people had to kind of get on board. It was kind of a sort of a very long extended valley, if you will. And we talked about trials and tribulations every Friday, and this is where kind of our weekly Q&A session came up as a company. On every Friday at 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, we would sit down, and anyone in the company could just pepper me and my co-founder with questions of like, what are you guys thinking? What are you doing? Is this the right direction ahead? And it turned into folks sticking around because we told them the truth, right? We weren't sure in some of these things. We were trying stuff. We wanted to figure it out together. And I think that really kind of pulled the company through to our Series A in mid 2016, and then kind of, things took off from there. The second time I would tell you was the first 2.5, 3 months of the pandemic last year, right? A lot of unknowns. We sell into the food service space, as you had mentioned, lots of restaurant chains, lots of convenience stores. Well, some of those folks took a really early, massive hit in the pandemic. Some bounced back better, others not so much. But those first 2.5, 3 months of the pandemic required a lot of us to sort of put our heads together, change the direction of the business, make free offerings. And I'm not sure we could have done that as easily if there wasn't the sort of trust that existed, not just between the leadership team, but the rest of the organization as well. And we were relatively upfront of when we thought things were going to go well and when things were going to go break in the right direction. And it's turned out quite phenomenal for us. I mean, the last 12 months, we've more than doubled the size of the company, more than doubled the revenue in the business. I think the things that we did as an organization back then to be transparent, authentic, and trying to laugh even during the tough times allowed us to kind of push through some of this, right? Which I'm not sure a lot of other companies could have done.
On that 2014 time period, I'm going to make a pivot here in our last couple of minutes on a story of our moment, a increasing rise in remote work. In that 2014 time period, were you guys in an office together, or at least most of you, or was a chunk of you in person
all
together?
of us. Yeah, so all of us at that point were all in one office. Actually, at that point, still, it was we had just moved out of a co-working space into an office that maybe fit like 14 or 15 people.
Right.
And we were all in one place. And so it was very easy, right? We'd see each other. We'd care about each other. We'd go have drinks. We'd hang out on the weekends, right? We'd go out for dinner together, whatever it was, right? And as time moved on, it was in end of 2016, beginning of 2017, we decided to hire our first individual outside of San Francisco, and that was our current EVP of sales, Nikki, who's based in Atlanta. And this was tough, right? This was the first executive that we were hiring outside of San Francisco. We were doing it in a different city, and we needed to sort of set culture at that point, the way we communicate, the things that we think about, how open we are with each other. Even today, after spending the last 20 months in a basically remote only state. We have something as simple as making sure that everyone has got one voice, one screen, right? So if you're talking, you're hopping into a meeting, it doesn't matter if 3 of you are in the same office. You're not hopping in a conference room while 2 others are joining remotely. That doesn't work, right? Like everyone needs to be on the same level playing field. Like it's good that you can come into an office, but if you've got meetings with folks across other ones, you got to stay in front of your computer and make sure that there's a level ground around there.
So let's keep on that track and maybe send us out even if companies are using some office time, but they have some remote employees, or if they're going entirely distributed. We have a range of technically companies. So talk a bit about what you're identifying early on as opportunities and obstacles in this for managing culture in the Valley during the tough times when it's harder for you to read whether someone's feeling the pain because of the company or just because they're having a totally separate personal issue. What's good, what's bad about managing in the valleys when you're fully remote?
Yeah, I think, listen, we've had a very good last 12 months, and I predict we'll continue to have a very good next 12 months as well. But I think
A
the big
CEO who
challenge,
tells me he predicts a bright future. That's first
of
for me,
course, that's
Vlad.
the way
I
you got to do it.
appreciate it.
I'm glad I'm the first one. I'm glad I'm the first one. So I think the most important part is that, in today's world, if you join a company that's remote, this laptop that I'm standing in front of, that's all you have. That's your company. That's your team in some ways, right?
Mhm.
You don't see them in person. You don't shake hands. You don't high five each other during the wins. And so you need to find ways to connect back to the organization, right? We've got effectively what we call four offices. We've got Atlanta, we've got San Francisco, we've got Guadalajara, and then we've got this fourth office, which is remote. And technically, that office is now larger than any of our individual ones, right? So we think of ourselves as a bit of a remote first company, but with an office centric presence, right? So
Mm.
for the offices that we do have, we'd love for people to come in and meet up there. We make sure that departments, as much as they can coming out of the pandemic, are meeting up once a quarter, right? Or teams are meeting up once a quarter together at one of those offices or somewhere else. We get the whole company together once a year down in typically around Cancun, where we make sure everyone's kind of on the same page and moving in the right direction. And I think the last part of it is just very sort of authentic, honest conversation with one another, right? It isn't just about the next ticket that you're completing, the next sales deal that you're trying to get done. You need to care about people. And just because you can't see them directly next to one another and you're not sitting next to one another, you need to make sure that you hop on those extra calls and you make sure you find out how they're doing, making sure that they're following and understanding how the company's operating. And so for us, a lot of these principles, the way that we write things down, share with one another, decisions we make, the board members we share out, all of it is accessible by anyone in the business through any of our online channels or online repositories that we use for sharing this information, right?
Mm.
And it gives them some way to kind of connect to the decisions in the business as well as the people that they can do that, once a quarter with the rest of the organization.
Vladik, that's great. We are unfortunately short on time. That's Vlad Rihkter, CEO of Zenput. We're talking about building culture in the Valley in this week's Culture Builder Live. We'll be back next week with more conversations on building better companies. Vladik, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Chris.
See you guys.